the richest empire the world had ever seen, collapsed because of its own treasure. In the 1500s, Spain ruled half the planet. Gold and silver poured in like an endless tide. So much that people said the sun never sets on the Spanish Empire. But behind the glitter, something was rotting. Prices exploded, the economy cracked. And within a century, the empire that owned the world went bankrupt. Again and again. Sound familiar? It should. Because what destroyed Spain still threatens modern economies today. Spain once held the world in its hands. In the 16th century, it wasn't Britain ruling the waves. It was Spain. For the first time in history, one crown commanded a global empire stretching from Europe to Africa, from the Americas to Asia. The saying, "The sun never sets on the Spanish Empire," was born here, and later borrowed by the British. But here's the paradox. The richest empire the world had ever seen collapsed under the weight of its own treasure. And that story matters today. Because, just like Spain, we often mistake a sudden flood of money for real wealth. And the crash that follows is always brutal. When Spain stumbled into the New World after 1492, it hit what looked like an infinite jackpot. Gold and silver poured in from lands no European had dreamed existed. The Aztec Empire fell in 1521, opening the silver mines of Zacatecas. 10 years later, the conquest of Peru unlocked the mountain of silver at Potosi, a mine so vast it was called the mountain that eats men. For more than a century, treasure fleets carried its riches across the Atlantic. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain imported around 180,000 tons of silver and 2,000 tons of gold, more silver than all of Europe had mined in the previous 1,000 years combined. This flood of metal didn't just reshape Europe, it reshaped the world. From Seville and Cadiz, Spanish ships carried silver east to the Mediterranean, north to the Low Countries, and west across the Pacific to Manila, where it traded hands for Chinese silk and porcelain. The first truly global economy was born, and Spain sat at its center. Now, here's the part Americans rarely hear. When Jamestown was founded in 1607, a swamp barely clinging to life, Mexico City already had universities, cathedrals, and printing presses. Lima was thriving. St. Augustine in Florida, founded in 1565, was the first permanent European settlement in what's now the U.S., 4 decades before Jamestown. Spain wasn't just ahead. It was building global infrastructure, while Britain and France were still fumbling with failed colonies. And yet, the empire was hollow. Spain confused treasure with wealth. The silver was real, but what they did with it turned strength into weakness. Prices exploded. Between 1500 and 1600, inflation ran wild. Prices quadrupled in a century. Ordinary Spaniards could no longer afford bread or clothing, even as a silver poured through Seville, because money only holds value when it's scarce enough to be trusted. Economists later called it the price revolution, the first great wave of global inflation. Too much silver, chasing too few goods, and it hit unevenly. The nobles, merchants, and bankers who touched silver first got rich before prices caught up. But ordinary people, paid in fixed wages, were left behind. The irony was brutal. The more silver Spain brought home, the poorer its people became. Instead of investing in production, Spain splurged on imports. Italian merchants, Dutch traders, and German craftsmen got rich, selling luxuries to Spain, all paid for with New World silver. Spanish industries withered. Why build when treasure ships arrived every season? And the crown spent fortunes on war. The Habsburg kings saw themselves as defenders of Catholicism after the Reformation, and that crusade burned through oceans of silver. Money from Mexico and Peru funded wars against the Ottomans, the Dutch, and Protestant England. The Armada of 1588, built to crush England, was financed by American treasure. When it failed, the financial fallout was devastating. So where did all that gold and silver go? Into battlefields, ships, and debt. Because Spain didn't just spend what it had. It borrowed against treasure that hadn't even arrived yet. German banking families like the Fuggers and later Genoese financiers lent enormous sums secured by future silver fleets. On paper, it looked brilliant. In reality, it was suicide. A single storm or pirate raid could destroy an entire year's worth of revenue, and when that happened, Spain defaulted. Again and again. 4 times in the 16th century alone. 1557, 1575, 1596, and 1607. The richest empire on earth, declaring bankruptcy every 2 decades. And into this fragile system sailed the pirates. They weren't random raiders. They were weapons of economic warfare. England and the Netherlands knew that if you struck the treasure fleets, you didn't just steal silver, you shattered Spain's credit. Francis Drake, backed by Queen Elizabeth, circled the globe in the 1580s, plundering Spanish galleons and bringing home treasure worth half of England's annual income. In 1628, Dutch privateer Piet Hein captured an entire treasure fleet off Cuba, worth over 11 million guilders. That one strike nearly wrecked Spain's economy. Every lost fleet wasn't just a disaster at sea. It was a sovereign default in real time. Spain had mortgaged tomorrow's treasure. And when pirates or storms claimed it, Europe's creditors went unpaid. Meanwhile, England and the Dutch reinvested the silver into navies, banks, and trading companies, the foundations of their future empires. Spain's lifeline had become its Achilles heel. It could have been different. Spain could have used that flood of bullion to build industry, fund innovation, or create fairer taxation. Instead, it got addicted to debt, borrowing against fleets that might never return. By the early 1600s, the cracks were showing. Inflation had hollowed the economy. Repeated bankruptcies shattered trust. The 30 Years' War drained what little remained. The Dutch Republic broke away. England's navy and banking system surged ahead. Spain still looked mighty on maps, but it was running on fumes. For ordinary Spaniards, wealth was an illusion. Prices soared, wages froze, taxes climbed, and the empire devoured itself from within. Other powers took note. They saw that gold alone couldn't build an empire. Spain's model was extraction. Mines, tribute, treasure fleets. Britain and the Dutch built systems, companies, trade routes, and finance. They didn't wait for treasure. They created it. That's the difference. Spain measured wealth in treasure. Britain and the Dutch measured it in systems. One is finite. The other multiplies, and history shows which one lasts. By the 1700s, Spain was a fading giant, rich in land, poor in power. Its story is more than history. It's a warning. Because when floods of money come, from mines, credit, or printed cash, the temptation is always the same. Spend it, borrow against it, waste it on wars or luxuries. But without discipline and real productivity, that money rots the foundation of a nation. Spain's peasants watched silver flood Seville, while bread prices soared. Today, savers watch inflation eat their wages while being told the economy is strong. The details change. The feeling doesn't. When wealth concentrates in fragile systems, a treasure fleet, a giant bank, or a bubble market, all it takes is one ship, one bank, one shock, and everything falls apart. Treasure isn't wealth. Silver isn't security. Real wealth is built, not found. Spain thought endless silver meant endless power. In truth, it meant fragility. And the question isn't whether history will repeat. It's whether we'll recognize the warning in time. If this opened your eyes, don't stop here. Subscribe, because history doesn't just tell us what happened. It tells us what's next.